Martian Gothic is one of those games that got overlooked on the PlayStation, mainly due to it seemingly just being a shameless copy of Resident Evil and the fact that it was released as a budget title towards the end of the console's life. And while there is some truth to that, it actually does a few things differently and puts far more of a focus on puzzles throughout its runtime. Like its name implies, the events of the game take place on a Martian base, where a crew of special operatives have been tasked to investigate why the base has gone silent. Upon their arrival, it's not long before it all goes south, with them discovering the remains of the dead crew members who have now become bloodthirsty zombies. From here, you'll have to fight your way out of the station and ultimately get to the bottom of what went down. Now, in terms of gameplay, this is where the similarities with Resident Evil come to the forefront. You've got tank controls, fixed camera angles, and pre-rendered backgrounds that all work together to significantly add to the overall atmosphere of the adventure. Even though puzzles are the main focus, combat does occur throughout the game, with a healthy selection of weapons being able to be acquired, but ammo and healing items are plentiful, which in all honesty does detract from the challenge. But as each zombie has the ability to regenerate and never really die, it kinda makes sense to have these items in abundance. What really helps the game excel though is the writing and dialogue that works together to create an engrossing world populated by believable characters. This is further hit home by the surprisingly good voice acting, which brings life to the events that transpire and really puts you into the mindset of the game's cast. When it comes down to it, it never quite reaches the same heights of the series that inspired it, but Martian Gothic is still definitely worth playing. They're Here is a first-person survival horror that follows a bunch of high school students who are preparing for an upcoming festival when they find they've been locked in overnight, and they soon discover that they aren't alone. You take on the role of Tatsuya and have to explore the school, solve puzzles, and find a way out before everyone is killed by a mysterious force that haunts the hallways. Now, the game is pretty slow at the beginning, and it's here where you'll get to meet your classmates and faculty members, which serves to flesh out their characters and to develop bonds with them that will be tested throughout the experience. As you advance, you'll begin to unlock more parts of the school to explore, and it can become a bit confusing on where to go and what to do, but therein lies the game's charm, as this sense of not knowing what's around each corner and being at the mercy of the mysterious entities that plague the facility will really keep you on the edge of your seat. One aspect about They're Here that I really enjoyed though was its hiding mechanic. Every once in a while, an enemy will chase you into a room, and you'll have a limited amount of time to hide before they kill you. You'll hide in a locker or a cardboard box, or through a number of other creative ways, and then a cutscene will play that shows the enemy walk in, look around, and then leave. And it would have been nice to have seen a few more of them sprinkled throughout the adventure. Although it's not without its flaws, They're Here is definitely one of the PlayStation's most terrifying games, and with it now being fully translated for Western players, it's a game I can fully recommend for you to try out for yourself. First things first, this isn't exactly the second installment of the Clock Tower franchise, and is actually the third in the series due to one of the games never releasing outside of Japan. The story picks up and introduces players to Alyssa, who has to wear a magical amulet that prevents her from slipping into her alter ego known as Mr. Bates. At some point in her life prior to the events of the game, Bates was allowed to take control of Alyssa during a confrontation with bullies at her school, which led to him killing some of them and Alyssa ending up in an asylum. The game begins after Alyssa gets released and is sent to live with her relatives, but things immediately start to go crazy the moment you arrive. Before you can even settle in, you'll begin to find severed body parts strewn throughout the house, and as if that wasn't odd enough, all of them are green and producing a strange type of yellow blood. Before you know it, you'll be chased around the house by a knife-wielding 7-year-old who you'll be forced to smack around or maybe even shoot in order to defend yourself. And it's here where Alyssa's ability to transform come into full swing. Whereas Alyssa is apprehensive and scared, her alter ego Bates seems to thrive off the tension, and this is where the amulet mechanic comes into play. Picking up and holding onto the amulet will prevent you from transforming into your alter ego. However, there are times where you'll need to become Bates in order to prevent NPCs and monsters from killing the more vulnerable Alyssa. From here, you'll begin to try and unravel the mystery of the house, and with several different endings to the story, there's plenty of reasons to jump back in once you've completed it for the first time. Overall, the struggle within is a solid survival horror, but due to the point-and-click setup, it likely won't be for everyone. Hell Knight is perhaps one of the most overlooked games on the PlayStation that never got its time in the spotlight and would go on to become a sort of cult classic amongst horror enthusiasts. It sees you taking the role of a nameless citizen who's involved in a crash on the Tokyo Underground, and as you pick yourself out of the bloody rubble, a demonic beast emerges from the train having slaughtered everyone on board. Along with a few other survivors, you flee blindly into the tunnels pursued by the monster, where all you can do is run. There's no combat, no health bars or weapons, and should it catch up to you, it's an instant game over. As you can imagine, this produces a huge amount of fear as you explore the depths of the city, but the overall size of it feels unnecessary, and at points it's really easy to find yourself just aimlessly wandering about. I wouldn't have minded this aspect of the game if it wasn't for the restrictions on running that see an invisible stamina meter beginning to build, and when it peaks your heart starts to pound to the soundtrack, the controller vibrations start to drill through your hands, the screen warbles, and if you keep trying to overexert yourself, blood fills the screen and you are completely paralyzed. Of course, this mechanic also adds to the tension, but would have been far better if the environments were scaled back just a bit, as the normal walk speed is just far too slow. Regardless of this issue, however, Hell Knight is easily one of the scariest games on the system, so if you can look past some of the more frustrating aspects of the gameplay, it's definitely worth giving a go, especially for long-time fans of survival horrors. To many people, Capcom's Resident Evil series is considered the father of survival horror, but it actually started a bit earlier with Infogrames Alone in the Dark. Unfortunately, it never quite reached the same heights of the franchise it clearly inspired, but the new Nightmare on the PlayStation was just as good in its own right. The story revolves around Edward and Eileen, as they both try to survive a literal nightmare after one of their friends was found dead on the shores of a mysterious island. Seeking revenge, Edward takes over the investigation, and they travel to the island, but their plane is attacked by an unknown force, which ends up with them both being separated. From here, you get to choose which character you'd like to play as, with both of them having subtle differences throughout their campaigns. Edward's is focused more on fighting, where Eileen has a lot more puzzles to deal with, and as a result, the game has a nice amount of replay value if you intend on seeing everything it has to offer. Now, shooting is a huge part of the experience, and while most monsters can be avoided, some have to be dealt with by using specific weapons. This really dials up the scare factor, and at times you'll find yourself in a hopeless situation, but thankfully both characters possess a flashlight, which can be used to stun the enemies for a short amount of time and give you a little window to escape. Visually, each environment is made up of pre-rendered backgrounds, which absolutely ooze detail and add life to the otherwise desolate island. If you enjoy other survival horror games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, then Alone in the Dark is something you do not want to skip. After the huge success of the Resident Evil series, it made sense that Capcom would explore different ideas using the same formula. What they came up with was Dino Crisis, which follows a member of a special operations unit tasked with investigating a research facility said to be run by a world-renowned scientist who is thought to have been dead. Upon arriving, it soon becomes apparent that the Doctor's experiments are more than unethical, with him genetically engineering dinosaurs now running amok across the island. In terms of gameplay, it's literally identical to Resident Evil, with it relying on tank controls and scarce resources to help amp up the tension as you advance through the story. Of course, the main stars of the show are the dinos themselves, from the T-Rex that constantly haunts you throughout the game to the small but nimble raptors that stop at nothing to chase you down. Of course, you've got a generous amount of weapons to help you hold your ground, but like I've mentioned, the ammo is extremely limited, so you've got to pick and choose the right moments to put up a fight, or cut your losses and evade them as efficiently as you can. Now, what made Dino Crisis a bit different from Resident Evil was that instead of presenting its world through the use of pre-rendered backgrounds, it takes full advantage of the hardware and depicts everything in full 3D. This change sees everything blending together in a much more cohesive way, as opposed to the character and enemy models looking out of place against the environments. Overall, Dino Crisis is one of the best when it comes to horror games on the PlayStation, and with it now being available to grab on the PlayStation Store for modern systems, there's never been a better time to give it a go for yourself. In Virus, players step into the boots of Joan, a member of a salvage crew trapped on an abandoned research vessel, overtaken by a malevolent alien force. The goal is simple: survive and destroy the biomechanical alien entities infecting the ship, while solving puzzles, collecting key items, and making it off the ship alive. The game plays out as a blend of third-person shooting, light puzzle solving, and exploration. Each area of the ship has various threats, from robotic drones to larger creatures, creating a tense, horror-filled atmosphere. And while the shooting mechanics feel standard, they're effective and add to the survival horror feel, especially as ammo and health pickups are really scarce. However, Virus suffers from somewhat stiff controls, which can make combat a bit clunky. Moving around the narrow, dimly lit corridors while aiming and avoiding attacks can take some time to get used to, but once everything clicks, it does become a lot more manageable, but I can understand why it may turn some players away. On a positive note, Virus does well in capturing a foreboding and dark atmosphere. The ship's design is grimy and claustrophobic, reminiscent of classic sci-fi horror like Alien, and it's clear the developers invested effort into giving players a sense of unease and dread as they explore. However, the graphics, whilst decent for their time, lack the polish of other late PS1 games, with relatively low detail in the character models and some repetitive textures throughout the environments. Overall, it's a fun but mixed experience. Its eerie atmosphere and the solid concept of a virus infecting a desolate ship works in its favor, but the issues with control may be a bit too much to swallow for some. Mazurna Falls is a murder mystery adventure that came from the same minds behind the Clock Tower series. Unfortunately, it never found its way outside of Japan, but is now fully translated for players in the West to give it a go. The story picks up with the player filling the shoes of Matthew, a fellow student of a girl who's vanished without a trace, and he soon finds himself entangled in the enigma of her disappearance and begins to discover the sinister undercurrents of the seemingly peaceful town. Speaking of the town, for a game that released in '98, it's truly impressive. There are NPCs with daily routines you can follow from work to home if you wanted to, an incredibly detailed space you can explore freely on foot or in your car, and a day and night cycle that will brutally rob you of the truth if you miss important sequences. Apart from the usual adventure gameplay that sees you talking with the town's residents and unraveling the mystery, there are several other styles of play that help mix up the action. From on-rail shooting sections to one-on-one fights and car chases, it's an experience that constantly surprises. Now, if you're at all a fan of the likes of Twin Peaks, then Mazurna Falls will be right up your alley, as it's clear to see that it was one of the main influences behind the game. From the remote American town to the subtle occult references, it builds up an incredible mystery, and with so many things that are easy to miss, subsequent playthroughs are all the more enjoyable as well. Even though there are a few issues with the game, the positives easily outweigh the negatives, so if you're looking for a unique murder mystery to sink your teeth into, make sure you don't pass on Mazurna Falls. The first Resident Evil was a huge hit upon its release, so it was a bit of a no-brainer that Capcom would produce a sequel that took everything from the original and dialed it all up to 11, leaving behind the secluded mansion for a far more open and relatable location in Raccoon City. It sees you having the option of playing as either Claire or Leon across several scenarios that all throw you into the deep end as you fight to find a way out of the city. Now, in terms of gameplay, it's identical to the first game and relies upon tank controls, and even though it won't be for everyone as a result of it, I feel they really add to the sense of fear throughout the experience. As you would expect, you get to wield a wide selection of weapons throughout the game, from the standard pistol to more exotic offerings like the flamethrower that makes short work of the different types of enemies you'll encounter. From the shuffling zombies to the terrifying lickers and boss fights, there's a nice amount of them that'll keep you on your toes throughout each campaign and make sure that you stay on top of the scarce resources available throughout the city. One aspect of the game that really helps set it apart from others though is the audio design, and it's here where the creepiness of the game really lies. From the imposing music floating in the background to your footsteps echoing as the moans of the zombies ring out around you, it all works together to create an unparalleled atmosphere that helps amp up the scare factor. Overall, even though it may seem crude by today's standards, there's no denying what Resident Evil 2 did for the survival horror genre as a whole, and because of this, it's just as enjoyable as it was when it first released. So if you've never got round to trying out the original version of this timeless classic, now would be the perfect time. Silent Hill was without a doubt one of the most impressive games on the PlayStation 1 that would go on to build one of the most successful survival horror series of all time. It sees the player taking on the role of Harry Mason as he makes his way to Silent Hill in the hopes of finding his missing daughter. Upon arriving, it's clear that not everything is as it seems, with the town being seemingly overrun with grotesque monsters, with each and every step taking you further into the nightmare. Like any self-respecting video game hero though, Harry has got a few ways to fight back and stand his ground, from handguns to shotguns and pipes, but it's not all about simply blasting your way through the game, as a lot of it revolves around puzzles that will really test your patience. As opposed to the likes of Resident Evil and Alone in the Dark, what helped set Silent Hill apart was that it didn't rely on pre-rendered backgrounds and would instead present its world in full 3D. To achieve this, the developers came up with the concept of the fog that would strategically mask the view distance and allow for far more detail to be rendered at once. The result is one of the scariest and most horrifying games in the PlayStation's library. From the desolate streets to the depths of the otherworld, the game provides a constant sense of dread as you slowly edge towards its end. And the keyword here is atmosphere. It's impossible to say why this game is as thick with it as it is, but it'll creep up on you like a shadow in the night and start to gnaw away into the back of your mind as it slowly blossoms into full-blown, genuinely unsettling fear. Although not without its flaws, Silent Hill is just as enjoyable today as it was when it first released, so if you can find it for a decent price, don't hesitate in picking it up. Well, that does it for another video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos which release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with and to take part in giveaways. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.